Well, the roar is back along the Saginaw River in downtown Bay City.
That's right. And starting today, you'll have the chance to check out some major family fun with powerboat racing and much more.
Take the sunscreen and look for temperatures to make it into the mid-80s by afternoon, but with low humidity.
Sounds like the perfect forecast to take in the Bay City Fireworks Festival tonight.
We couldn't buy heroin around this area. In the 90s, no. We couldn't buy it. Didn't know anything about it. Never dealt with it, really. I mean, other than a few different times.
In the year 2015, you had 49 overdose deaths caused by heroin or opioids.
In June of 2015, the health department officially declared an advisory for the county.
It has changed considerably to mostly heroin.
There's a real misconception in the public. You're just looking at skid row bums in the street that are the heroin users.
You know, this whole heroin deal, I truly believe it's something that law enforcement kind of got caught with their pants down.
Heroin, a member of the opiate family. Since 1999, opiate deaths have nearly quadrupled. Today, opioids like oxycodone and heroin kill more Americans than any other category of drug. Bay County, Michigan is just one example of this national epidemic. In 2015, opioids killed 27 people in the county, more than traffic or firearms. Despite professional efforts across the community, the crisis continues to rage, with seemingly no end in sight.
The cause of this living death is a white powder, innocent looking, but deadly.
Opiates begin as opium poppies. The flowers are crowned with a circlet of stigma for pollination. Before they are fully ripe, poppies are cut and bled of their sap. This sap is dried and refined into opiates.
Contained in opium is morphine.
Morphine, as a molecule, has two of what we refer to as functional groups on it, two alcohol groups. You can perform a chemical reaction known as an acetylation with a molecule known as acetic anhydride. This is really simple to do. You can imagine maybe they take a flask and fill it with acetic anhydride and water. They could just sprinkle in the solid morphine, and after heating that, they'd get a molecule known as heroin, originally designed as a less addictive version of morphine.
And they said, if we give this to people, it'll be like morphine, and we'll get all those morphine addicts off morphine, and then we can stop the heroin. What they didn't realize was that heroin was 2 to 3 times stronger than morphine, and then people were addicted to it.
Heroin is infamous for leaving track marks, red puncture wounds left on users' forearms. But the torment most addicts suffer cannot be covered up by sleeves.
I think it was the fear of not knowing what my life was like before I had started doing it. Like, you know, I forgot what my life was like without it in it. So I felt like it had grown so bad, it was just a part of me. And I couldn't see myself not doing heroin.
The most destructive part is, I mean, after like 4 hours, they start getting sick. They call it getting dope sick. Getting dope sick means that they explained to me as I did, it'll be like having a very violent case of the flu. And they need heroin to make that go away. You know, they have to have it. That's the addiction, and you can't really go without it without being really sick. So it's kind of a never-ending process for them.
My first exposure to drug use was an ex-boyfriend of mine. I ended up breaking up with him because my parents had found out that I was doing drugs, and he was doing drugs, so that relationship kind of ended. And it was tough, but the thing was the relationship ended, but not the problem.
The very first day I did heroin, it was not as if I went looking for it. It became the convenient drug in my neighborhood. And I simply went to be with my friends one afternoon, and instead of people drinking or smoking marijuana, they had heroin. And these were all my friends I had grown up with and played Little League baseball with and walked back and forth to school with. And they just simply say, "Hey, Rick, you want to try some?" And it wasn't like I woke up that morning thinking, I think I'll do heroin today. It was just there in front of me that afternoon.
It's just here and there. It wasn't really one of those habits we'd go out and do every day. It was just, you know, hey, we got some extra money. There's nothing going on. No one's around. Let's have some fun.
The majority of those people that I began doing heroin with are dead now, in one way or another associated with the use of heroin.
So, you're snorting it, huh? Yeah. Well, don't be a sucker. You're wasting it that way. Use a needle. Is that what you do, Louis? Listen, kid, I ain't on the stuff.
People start heroin by saying, well, I can snort it or I can smoke it and I won't get addicted. And after a couple weeks, you realize how much money you're spending and how much you're wasting in your nose. So you just start injecting it.
Yeah, sure. Like I'm doing it, see? Mainlining it.
Once they get addicted to heroin, they don't realize it changes them. And I've seen this firsthand from people that, you know, kids that I've dealt with over the years, and it just changes their perspective on everything. It's almost like it rewires their thought patterns.
When I was supposed to be out and pursuing my future, I was just throwing it away. I lost my job. I lost almost everything other than my parents. And, you know, God love them because they never gave up on me once during this whole ordeal. And they still haven't.
When Kev was born, him and I were best friends. And we did everything together. He was quiet. He was funny, man. He was always smiling. If you ever see his pictures, he was just always smiling. I had no clue.
That's the same response that we get from a lot of people, because they don't know. Because that's not something that's going to happen to my kid. My kid's a good kid. He's not going to do something like heroin. That's for some junkie who lives out in the alley and does bad things to people. It doesn't happen to good people, but it certainly does happen to a lot of good people.
At age 11, I took him to the Detroit Pistons basketball camp. Kevin hit 11 NBA threes in a row and smoked them all 3 games. And by the time he was 13 years old, he had over 100 awards, and all of his trophies were first place. So yeah, he was very gifted, and I believe he wanted to be an NBA player, and there was the only thing stopping him was him. But
it was a total shock because I didn't know he was. I mean, yeah, I knew he'd done a little bit, but I didn't know he'd done enough to even affect himself. I mean, he was fine when I left. He gave me a hug. He told me he loved me. He was like, "I'll see you tomorrow, man."
He was at a party, and these are his friends that were with him, supposedly his friends. Well, when he took the heroin, he reacted to it, and out of fear, instead of calling 911, because they didn't want to get in trouble, they actually picked him up. And this is one of his friends who was there that night, talked to me, and I know he feels a ton of guilt. But they actually picked Kev up and they carried him into a bedroom. And you know that he's dying, they're watching him die, so they set him on a bed, and they just left him there. And these are his friends, and they didn't even call 911 until the next morning out of fear. I didn't see no signs. I didn't see any symptoms. I just know that he was just worried like a normal person would worry. He had some fears in his life, and instead of coming to his dad, he just chose to turn to the drug instead of me, which is sad because we were always close. He just made one decision that, you know, it cost him his life.
It's been a hard time for me. I'm not going to lie, the other night I tried throwing myself out the window. A post came across my Facebook. I had Kevin and he was rapping and I was drinking and really messed up, and I just tried throwing myself out a window. And it took my girlfriend and like 5 other people to hold me in.
Since 2001, the rate of opioid-related overdose deaths like Kevin's has doubled, and it only continues to increase with each passing year.
There's very few days of the week that we don't run an overdose call. We had an overdose patient on a narcotics overdose that was picked up by our night shift because the patient had basically stopped breathing. Was taken into ED, converted with the medications, then walked out AMA, against medical advice, literally walked out of the building. And 2 hours later, my partner and I ended up picking up that patient again in respiratory arrest in the field, who had gone home, shot up with the medication again, and I again had to place an advanced airway intubation hours later. So, and this is common.
While heroin continues to steal headlines, prescription opiates can be just as deadly. Of the approximately 47,000 drug overdose deaths that occurred in 2014, almost 19,000 were tied to prescription pain relievers.
My dad was actually addicted to Vicodin, and I knew what he was taking, but I didn't know what they were, what they did to you. And I took some, and it was done after that. I immediately fell in love with it. I liked the feeling of not feeling, so to say. In the beginning, it was fun. I thought it was helping me, and I thought it was doing good. And then the further into it I got, the worse it got. I was suicidal at times. I had really bad depression, really bad anxiety. I've never had anxiety, and I still have anxiety to this day from it. Just because when I was on it, I was me. I felt like that was me. So when I wasn't on it, I was a completely different person. I didn't know how to act. I was always stressed out and anxious, and it was like night and day. Physically, I looked like death, honestly. I got down to 90 pounds at one time. Every bone in my body was hanging out. When I think back, I honestly don't know how I made it out alive. I had dark circles under my eyes, my face was sunken, my cheeks were sunken, my hair was falling out. It ruined my whole body.
The youngest I've had with a prescription drug overdose was in teens, but I've had people in their 60s in Essexville who've had overdoses with it. So it covers the entire county. It leaves no demographic or no geographic area out.
I got hurt, and had migraines and some back pain, some low back pain. And I was given a shot. It was one I could take at home. It was 8 years total that I used over an 11-year period.
People look at addiction as, well, the addict, decided to do this. A big majority of these patients ended up prescription overdose or prescription addicts because of true medical needs. Some of them, yes, it was experimental. But a good portion of them had medical conditions, medical problems, in which they were treated. And during that treatment and pain management, they got addicted to a narcotic drug.
I had a kid who was a football player. I don't know if he blew out his kneecap or what the situation was, but he hurt himself playing football. Well, he went to the doctor. They had prescribed him Oxycontin. One day when the doctor had cut him off from the Oxycontin and said, you shouldn't be on this anymore, the kid had went from the Oxycontin to the heroin.
Parents tend to, and even teens tend to think as prescription drugs being safer, so it's okay to share those medicines within families, share those medicines within friends, which in turn sends a message inadvertently to the young people about those things.
The way this started was back in the 90s and 2000s when we had the doctors that started prescribing all the pain medications.
An organization, a non-governmental organization, said that pain was the fifth vital sign, and they pushed it through hospitals and public health clinics and medical schools, and it sounded like a really good idea. But they didn't follow, or they didn't pair pain as the fifth vital sign with the proper diagnosis and treatment of pain acutely or chronically in high and low risk patients. So what you had was drugs came out that were opioid based that have a high potential for addiction. And we knew that these drugs worked very well in cancer patients with terminal pain. And those standards were now applied to chronic pain and sometimes to acute pain. And it was completely inappropriate, and it was all driven by pain as the fifth vital sign. American Medical Association, Joint Commission on Hospital Accreditation, the FDA, the Health and Human Services, all sorts of government organizations and insurance companies and hospitals and medical schools all endorse this.
I worked pretty much straight narcotics since 1998. Really from 94 until 2006, we only dealt with it a couple times. And then in 2006, that's when the heroin started to explode.
About 10 years ago, one of the things that happened is we started trying to remove the medicines from the homes of families to assure that those that were young people wouldn't have access to those. However, one of the unintended consequences of that is that we drove the price of those medicines up.
When the cartels started shipping more of the heroin into the United States, it's basically economics. It's cheaper to get heroin than it is to get prescription pills.
Government agencies charged with the enforcement of narcotics laws have been able until recently to decrease steadily the number of addicts in the United States.
The FDA did some investigations because people were dying on Vicodin and oxycodone and hydrocodone and methadone, and they said, how's this all happening? And it was, again, whatever was being prescribed and being sold was preceding whatever death statistic there was.
And after a long period of time, people started getting addicted on these pain medications, and they realized there was this addiction going on. They changed some of the formulas.
They added like a gel to it, so it makes it harder to break it down to abuse it. And once that happened, then it seemed like there were more people trying to push heroin.
Now the American Medical Association says we're backing off. We are not supporting pain as a fifth vital sign. Hey, that's nice, but it's 17 years late. We should have put in brakes, but instead the federal government came out with a restrictive program that said we need to educate doctors, which they spent millions on, and it was called REMS, Risk Evaluation Mitigation Strategies. The medical schools were not required to teach it. Hospitals were not required to put it in place, and pain led to addiction, and the stigma of addiction in patients, because nobody was ready for this death storm, led to their marginalization.
That one doctor a couple of years ago in Saginaw, he was taken out of Bay Med, Saginaw hospitals, and Midland hospitals, could not practice in any one of them. He had all his rights taken away. Do I feel he was negligent? Most definitely, because he should have said, we still have a problem here. Let's try to figure out other ways to deal with your headache.
You don't get cured from being a narcotics addict overnight, right? You become a narcotics addict overnight, but you now have a lifelong problem that you have to deal with.
Friends of mine, they walked away for the same reasons, couldn't handle it anymore. They couldn't understand what was all going on there. My parents had to grow and evolve from what their previous outlooks of addiction were, which were not good. They were all negative things. And, my parents had this outlook on these, but and then they realized that, the tables are kind of turning here because this is their daughter. They raised me not to be that way. They raised me not to, I never committed a crime in my life growing up.
Every armed robbery I've covered was done by a heroin addict. They're not doing it out of malice or greed. It's more out of desperation, and they need to feed their Jones.
When you tell people that we have a heroin problem in the community, they often kind of look at you like, what are you talking about? This has been conning. We don't have them kind of issues up here, but that's the problem that we have with heroin. The stigma that it's just an inner city problem. It's a problem that's everywhere.
The public doesn't understand, and the institutions have stigma. None of the hospitals have an addiction medicine department. They should all have addiction medicine department. And I offered my services to a major hospital in this area, and they said, there's no money in it. So that's ridiculous. People are dying. More people die of drug abuse than prostate cancer. And these hospitals got doctors in every clinic doing rectal exams on men between the age of 40 and 60.
My articles tend to get a lot of traffic and get shared on social media, Twitter and Facebook and whatnot. And there's a lot of people commenting on it in the comments section. Sometimes it's not the best response because a lot of the people who sound off typically kind of have the myopic view of, it's not my problem, screw them, why are we wasting time on this, let them OD and we'll all be better off.
People do not want to accept that they have this problem. I mean, who wants to talk about how they have heroin in their community? People don't like to talk about stuff like that.
I think if they knew someone that was an addict, they would feel very, very different.
To me, a woman who was an addict was a prostitute, dirty, practically no teeth, tattoos all over. When they took us to an outside meeting, that's where I saw like 100 people, and they all were clean, they all were neat, they were laughing, which I didn't get.
People who are addicted with their brains that have been hijacked, they need treatment. And you can't treat them like lepers. You have to really fight the stigma and say this is a disease. It's a public health epidemic.
One of the things we've had to do as professionals, especially in our treatment court program, is to educate ourselves. It's very, very easy to pass judgment. You know, I think that's prejudice that our community has, that we have had to overcome in order to help individuals with addiction.
I did try to quit early on a couple times, but the longest I ever made it was maybe a week or two. Eventually the sickness of not having anything would just overcome, and I couldn't do it anymore. I wanted to so badly, but the physically being sick, I couldn't do it. Diarrhea, vomiting, not being able to sleep, not being able to sit still, like restless legs, and my muscles were really weak. It was hard to even get up and walk to the bathroom because I was so weak. I couldn't eat. I wouldn't eat. It's just the worst possible thing you could ever imagine. Worse than any sickness you could ever imagine.
I left treatment early. I couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand the noise, couldn't stand people. The counselor I was supposed to have didn't work with us. She said, take a book, read the first step. I've got a college degree. I didn't understand the first word, you know, because my head's all screwed up. So I left for those two reasons. In hindsight, which is always better, I wish I had stayed. I needed more than just relapse stuff while I was in treatment. I needed to know why this happened to me, because I was angry. Why did this? I did the why me shit.
I actually lost a really good friend of mine. She meant well with her life, but she had a lot of problems, just like me. And she couldn't get herself out of it. And she actually reached out to me saying, you know, I don't know what to do. I want to get out of this, and I want to, you know, I don't want to do this anymore, but I don't know how. And I gave her the tools to help her. And, you know, it gets to the point where everything that I said, she had some sort of excuse of what was stopping her from doing it. So I eventually had to walk away. And I felt bad because a week after I made that decision, she had overdosed and passed away. And that hit me so hard because I felt like I failed. And a lot of people tell me not to blame myself, and I don't. I just feel like, you know, I wish there was more that I could have done. I wish I had more time. And, you know, and then I think about her dad, because her dad was who found her. I wouldn't want to put my parents through that. So that's why I would never do that to them. And I couldn't do that to them. I couldn't have them find me like that. Or my friends that I live with now. I couldn't have them go through that.
When you're addicted, your brain is hijacked, and their first risk is that you're going to die. You're going to overdose and you're going to die.
When EMS gets involved in overdose type patients, we go through the same process that we go through with any critical patient, right? We call it the ABCs. So our primary concern in the field setting is to make sure you have an adequate open airway, that you're breathing adequately, and that you're circulating adequately. So that's our primary focus of all EMS personnel. With narcotic overdoses, there is a reversal agent for those, and that's called Narcan, naloxone. And naloxone is given immediately within the field. So obviously the best way to manage somebody's airway and their circulation and breathing is to get them to a state of consciousness again where they can handle their own. That's the advantage of Narcan and why it's been such a big push across the U.S. One thing the legislators did is they enacted House Bill 5404, which was in 2013, and that allowed us to expand the use of the reversal agent that's typically used for opioid overdoses called Narcan. Narcan is a reversal agent. It binds to the receptor sites within the body, the same receptor sites that are accepting that narcotic. It blocks them from use. The body expels the narcotic and you regain consciousness. So it works fairly quickly within the system. You got to remember that the narcotics are time-released medications, whether it's heroin, whether it's fentanyl, or whatever they're taking. So although it gets in your bloodstream, and your body digests it, it's released over time. It's active over time. So the problem with Narcan is that it blocks all those receptor sites, but then over time, the drug is outlasting the Narcan, so there has to be repeat doses of it to keep that effect.
I sat across the table from a girl 8 weeks ago, and she was crying and wanted to see if I could help her get off her heroin. She said to me, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I said, I'd help you as much as I can, but just off the cuff, when we get you stable, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? What kind of job do you want to do? Where do you want to go to school? Just try to get more out of her. And she screamed and yelled at me, I can't see past the heroin. What do you do for somebody like that? Well, the first thing you have to do is give them hope. So I gave her a Project Lazarus kit if she's using with people that she doesn't overdose. And the Project Lazarus kit has the naloxone in it. And the Project Lazarus kit has a nasal atomizer. And it has another syringe. And all this goes back to her house so she doesn't overdose.
And I'll be around to ask if you have any questions.
I provided 100 kits to sheriffs, 100 kits to police, and 100 kits to state troopers, and 100 kits to the public.
We're giving everybody time. On the back is my name and phone number, so 200 sheriffs and police can call me 24/7.
When I did that, I burned up my grant. And I didn't get paid for any mileage or teaching or meetings. I put it all in the product. Then I went back and asked the state for another grant, and they said, oh, we'd really like to do that. We have 21 counties. Right. I didn't get paid to do this the first time. How am I going to do 21 counties? So I gave them a budget, and I said, I'll quit my job. Oh, that's too expensive. Okay, so you just told me what the value is of people dying in Michigan.
We have to be able to get them into programs quickly, and it's very difficult to do if people don't have the money and don't have the insurance.
Efforts to remove stigma and allocate funding for treatment has become the never-ending debate for many of those fighting the epidemic. Though the county holds a number of meetings and summits, a singular solution remains intangible.
The only thing that really has kind of come up as an issue with having these summits is there's some people that show up and they're looking for the quick answer. They see the article in the newspaper that there's a heroin summit, that they're going to have law enforcement, treatment, prevention, recovery. All these organizations are coming out. We're going to talk about this heroin. And sometimes you're talking about people that may have been fighting this issue with their family for 5 or 10 years even. And they come out to this summit looking for a quick solution to the problem. And it's unfortunate that, we don't have that.
There are local systems within the Tri-County area, but they're all too overwhelmed because the number of addicts and the number of people who need those services outnumbers the available resources for them. So there's got to be some way for legislature, police, EMS, fire, hospital systems, and the medical community to come together to put together a system. I think likely that has to start with legislation and funding to be able to do that type of thing.
Even in some detox programs where I was working a couple of years ago, I tried to get people on naltrexone as a once-a-month injection, and I found out after talking to people who came to me when they got discharged from the facility that I was working with, that the counselors were telling them not to get the shot because they weren't really going to be clean then. It's not even an opiate agonist. It's there to block your brain from other drugs. And the counselors were counseling against getting the treatment. That's just insanity. That shows you that the stigma is even in the treatment community.
You're viewed as being worse for being a heroin addict than you are if you're an alcoholic, because alcohol is legal. You can be a functional alcoholic and it's, oh, that's just Jim. He's drunk all the time, but whatever. But if you're a junkie who could just as easily function to have pulled on a job, you're a bad guy. I think decriminalization would change some of that public stigma and would lead to more people getting help.
Decriminalization is the lessening of criminal penalties. In this case, it means no longer saddling individuals with a substance use disorder with jail time or felony convictions for their condition.
Judge, he's a good boy.
I understand.
This does not mean an end to prosecuting dealers or suppliers.
I'm going to sentence you to 1 year in the municipal jail.
But rather to reduce stigma, making it easier for sufferers of substance use to open up about their struggle and receive the necessary treatment.
Punishing people for the symptoms of the crime, or symptoms of the condition, is asinine and it's absurdist to me.
So could decriminalization help some addicts?
I believe it would. And I think if you look toward Portugal, that's a example that it would do that.
Portugal has become the poster child of drug decriminalization. In the 1990s, when nearly 1% of Portugal was addicted to heroin, some experts advocated a radical solution.
It's the only country that has decriminalized every substance. They did it about 15, 16 years ago. And they had a drug policy at the time that was very similar to ours, and the critics were, if we decriminalize this, the entire nation will be junkies, and crime will skyrocket, and it did the exact opposite.
After decriminalizing drugs, Portugal had a fatal overdose rate more than 5 times lower than the EU average. This is because Portuguese drug decriminalization is not drug tolerance. Authorities still confiscate drugs and pursue suppliers, but many of the funds being used to hunt, prosecute, and jail small-time offenders are now spent treating them.
The community might look at this as being, a law enforcement issue. How come the cops aren't doing anything about this? I think we've moved past that point now where everybody understands this is not a law enforcement issue. This is not something that we can arrest out of our county.
I think law enforcement is doing everything that they can within their budgets and within their power. I think the courts are trying to deal with this. In Bay County, we've got some drug courts that are really trying to help people. We need to provide better access to treatment, and of course, how do we do that? People are going to say, well, there's no money for it. There's no money for a lot of things, but it becomes a matter of priorities.
Despite a smart decriminalization strategy promising more money for treatment, the community remains divided over its effectiveness.
I think that people who do it and go to prison, they likely have the likelihood to do it again.
Let's talk about marijuana before we talk about heroin. What? No, that's stupid.
No, heroin decriminalization, that's out of the question for me.
Well, I think it has merit because our prisons are overloaded now, and maybe those people who have opiate problems don't need to be in prison. They maybe need to be in treatment centers, so I'm in favor of that.
I think a lot of people, and I've been hearing these questions again at some of the seminars, well, if we decriminalized it, more people would go on out and be more upfront about it and everything else. Well, those are only the people who want help. So I look at it from the standpoint, how many people right now are actively going out and trying to get off of it? I've never heard anybody who goes to a doctor and says, I'm hooked on the pain medicine, what can we do, and everything, that the doctor picks up the phone, calls the police, and they're arrested. So there's nothing prohibiting them from going on out and getting help.
There is the validity to that argument that once it gets them in the court system, not so much to punish them and just send them to prison, but they typically get like a probationary sentence. They don't go to prison unless they have a extensive criminal record, or they almost have to.
Having a felony conviction is just another step down. It prevents you from getting jobs. It prevents you from possibly, obtaining any kind of licensure if you wanted to receive a license in some kind of vocational setting. It could be very damaging when we're looking at self-use. The flip side is sometimes when young people or people who have OD'd or are in possession of the drug are charged and then housed, sometimes when they're in jail, they get clean.
Some people can get clean in jail. I wasn't one of them. I don't know too many people that have. I know a couple of people that have and relapsed a couple of years later, but I think that the treatment option should be there no matter what. I think that would be better than jail.
Well, I've written a few recently of people who have overdosed and been revived only to end up being criminally charged with possession, which is kind of troubling then because it runs the risk of decreasing people calling 911 if they're afraid that they're going to get charged. Yeah, they'll be revived, but then they'll wake up to a 4-year felony charge.
With the decriminalization, it will help the person that's there with the victim to call and they know they're not getting locked up or catching a case.
Regardless of whether decriminalization works, many can agree that treatment is worth funding. But what kind of treatment and how it's administered continue to be debated.
I think if you decriminalize it, I think it's less incentive for people to go on out there. Whereas with the criminal aspect of it, you've got probation officers and other people who are directing them and trying to get them into treatment. Now, the problem comes into, that I see a lot, is the fact that a lot of these people still fight the treatment. You sometimes have to force people to there, and then as they start to get clean, they really see, okay, I got over the bad part. I got over the hump. Now we can really go towards, and they see and they want, and that's the key, they want that sobriety. Whereas before, that want wasn't there, because they got to want it more than we want it for them. Because the bottom line is, if they don't want it, you're wasting your time. It may not be the greatest, but it's better than nothing.
It took me 8 years in and out of jail before I was finally offered treatment. I think that it should be made easier for people to go to treatment. A lot of people can't afford it or their insurance won't pay for it. I think the court should pay for it rather than locking somebody up in jail, because that does not help. All the times I was in and out of jail, it never helped. It made it worse. You can get drugs in jail too, just as easy as you can get them on the street. So I think that treatment should be the first option rather than jail.
What I believe is individuals who are actively addicted to whatever drug benefit from the opportunity to be involved in getting education about the disease of addiction, have the opportunity to pursue treatment, get connected with other recovering supports in the community. I believe that's really, really important.
After you're reversed, you need to be stabilized and you need to go to counseling. And good medication-assisted treatment counseling will either be methadone, buprenorphine, or naltrexone. And those medications have to come with counseling to change your coping skills, to expand your repertoire of coping skills, because you cope chemically.
Most of the families that I have worked with and most of the parents who are addicted, they want to get better and they want to be helped. And the kids want to go back to their parents. They always do. They want to be home. They want to take care of their parents, and their parents want to take care of them. And it is a very tricky balance. So we try to provide through education, through rehabilitation, coping skills for the kids to be returned home. But it's tricky. It's tough because sometimes it doesn't take.
Forcing someone into treatment, I don't think that works. But I'm going to talk about me. Anytime MDOC or somebody forced me to go to treatment, I went to treatment, and that was just for some R&R. And when I came out, I was on the running start once again until I made up my own mind. When I made up my mind and seen how my life was messed up, then that's when I wanted some treatment.
I had seen people that used to use and were clean, and I was jealous of how happy they were, so I wanted that. I felt selfish for wanting to use while having kids because it wasn't fair to my kids. Definitely being happy, though. I wanted to know what it was like to be happy again.
Every time I was in treatment, it gave me an opportunity to get away from the lifestyle, away from the street, away from the dangers, be able to get some nourishment, get my brain a rest, and be able to get perspective about my life.
I didn't ever really plan on going to like NA or anything like that. I don't really feel like that program is effective. It may work for some people. I'm not denying that it does, but I don't feel like it works for me. Honestly, the number one thing that made me stop, was my health. My health was getting worse, and it resulted in me being sick the entire year last year. I was very sick. I had bacterial endocarditis on my tricuspid valve. And the bacteria was so bad that it actually ate away at that valve, so it was not closing and opening properly. I was not getting enough oxygen in my blood. I was tired all the time. I couldn't even, stay up and around for more than a few minutes, and then I have to stop and rest and then just keep going until I'm done with whatever I'm doing. Something as simple as getting up and taking a shower was just like hell for me. I went down to Ann Arbor, and then they take a echocardiogram of my valve, and they just take one look at it, and they're like, no, this is not good. You have permanent damage. I'm not going to be able to fix this without surgery. And that was a big word for me. Like, I'm just like, excuse me? Like open heart surgery? Like that whole thing? Like a scar for the rest of my life on my chest? And another big impact for me was, I liked working out. I was very into fitness. And then I was told by my doctor, oh, well, you can't work out anymore. You can't work out anymore because your heart is not equipped to do that anymore. You can't even walk up a flight of stairs. And I'm just like, wow, that's just another thing that this is taken away from me. My life got really real at that point last year because my body was ready to give up before I was. And I couldn't handle that. But I'm better now. I do have my scar. It is right there, and it goes all the way down underneath here. And it's still pretty fresh because it was just the 14th, and I'm still just now kind of feeling better. My chest doesn't hurt as much. I couldn't even lay down flat without it hurting, so even when I was getting up to try to go to the bathroom or something, you had to, how you usually get up out of bed like this. You actually had to sit up and use those legs to push yourself up out of bed instead of going like this. Or when you sneezed or you coughed it. And then, that's basically it, but that's my heart right there. The only thing that I promised my doctor is that if you go back to this, I'm not gonna work on you again. So that was very terrific motivation. So you just kind of lose yourself for a little while. But my parents, they've never given up on me. They dealt with this for 5 years with me. They've never given up. They've never turned their back. They never even questioned whether they should stick around or not. And for that, I thank them for that. I don't know what I would do without them.
I love to counsel those that have been in the worst of the worst, the ones that blame their past or the ones that blame their parents. That's who they are. This is where I get to share them, my testimony.
When I'm around Steve, it kind of puts it kind of makes me feel closer to Kevin a little bit. And then whenever I need help, I know I can reach out to Steve because he's always there.
There's 2 books in Corinthians, 1 and 2. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not jealous. Love is not boastful. It's not rude. It does not keep no records of wrong. I mean, it's just, to me, it is the greatest gift. Kevin and I used to be a home team. That home team went away, when he hit a certain teenage, but we still were always close as a father and son. So to me, and always will be, 1 Corinthians 13, of hope, faith, and love, but of these 3, the greatest is love. It, to me, is hands down. It's more than just a word, because anybody can say, I love you. To me, actions speak louder than words.
The first one is the white color of surrender. It says, welcome on one side, and just for today. So you can only keep clean just for today. 1 minute, 1 hour at a time. And believe me, sometimes that's what it takes. The next one's orange. Orange is glad to hear. Changing new life. You're not wearing orange in jail anymore. Green, it's for 60 days. We mow the grass, we don't smoke it.
Being a part of Peer 360, I'm learning to help people more. I even picked up somebody that looks up to me where I can help them through their recovery. So on a regular basis, I'm helping people daily to recover.
Individuals who are engaged in active addiction, that they have ready access to all the types of services that can make a difference for making that transformation, including, again, from my experience, treatment was very helpful for me. And then, of course, community-based supports, such as Peer 360. There are other community-based supports out there as well. Those connections, making those easy, making readily available, making them available like right now for individuals. The more we can do that, the better we can serve and address the epidemic.
It took probably 2 or 3 years before I knew that they fully trusted me again, to the point where my dad would leave his wallet laying out, or my mom would leave her purse sitting out because they went and bought a safe to put the stuff in for when I was there, because they didn't trust me. As silly as it sounds, that day that they started leaving their money out around me was actually a good feeling, because I knew that they trusted me again.
Everyone's recovery story is different. For some, the road to recovery involves long-term supervised prescriptions, while others find guidance in spiritually based 12-step programs. Whatever the path, recovery is an ongoing process.
I wanted to get back in contact with you guys because a month after you guys initially interviewed me, I had relapsed.
Yeah, it was not even a month after you guys interviewed me the first time that I relapsed. The thing that I figured out was that even when I was clean, I was unhappy. And when I was using, I was unhappy. So there was really no point in me staying clean. And I would give off the impression that I was okay when I was clean, when I was really not. There was a lot going on up here.
All that time off of the drugs and working the heart back from rehab and all that, you think you're in the clear, but you're not ever in the clear. And I just couldn't believe it was happening again. But here we are again. It's a revolving door. It just keeps on revolving.
I figured if I acted just kind of forced it, just kind of faked it, I guess it would just go away, and when really I should have been working more towards on that end of the spectrum with my anxiety and my depression and why that is.
I've always helped her with her finances. I mean, making sure the money was always there to pay her rent, not giving it to her. She had to earn it. But having access to her bank accounts and getting access to her bank accounts, finding out there was a zero balance in there was pretty much the last straw.
I had told my mom that I had relapsed again, and that was the third time within a few months. And she got really angry, and she was yelling at me on the phone, and I don't want you around my family. I don't want you around the family anymore. I don't want you working for me anymore. Just screw you. She was really angry. But I took that at the time as wow, I really have nothing left. And I became very suicidal at that point. That day, I actually remember she was off in Lansing, so she wasn't even at home. And I know that I had a late paycheck at the flower shop. I called one of my dudes up, and I actually got whatever my paycheck was, and I think it was almost $200 of heroin. And I planned on doing all of it at once because I was done with life. I was done with everything.
So she took an overdose, or she thought would have been an overdose. And she woke up from it, and something told her, you're not supposed to die yet. So she called me and she said, Mom, I need to go to rehab. And I'm not leaving until they got me in an inpatient facility. And so we went.
While I was in detox, and I told her about it. And it wasn't that she was mad about it. It was just, she was like, wow, you would have left me to think that the last words that I said to you were bad. And, I didn't, and it was just so hard to hear that.
There's no end in sight. There's no relief. There's only nightmares. There's that phone call that's coming. You know it's coming.
Logistically, how did you get heroin?
How did I get it? Oh, well, shoot. Let me see. How do I explain this? Well, actually, what was really cool about this guy was he would come to me. Like, I wouldn't have to go to him, like, ever. Because I don't have a license, I don't have a car, so, you know, how am I gonna do this, right? He would just come up to me, and I would come up to his window, and that was it. Like, it was so easy. Like, it's ridiculous how easy it is. Like, as long as you got money, it's easy to get it anywhere. And that was within, like, 10 minutes. There's some guys out there that'll tell you that, hey, this stuff is potent, so be careful. But for the most part, a lot of them don't do that. Like, that's what I don't get. Like, if you know that there's a lethal dose of something in there, like fentanyl or something, or the newest rage was just carfentanil, that's the newest rage right now. People are dropping like flies everywhere. There was people that I knew in that rehab that had taken that stuff and would overdose like 3-4 times within like a week.
About 45 micrograms of fentanyl, and I'm talking micrograms, is about the normal use that you would use if you were in severe pain and you were in the hospital and they needed to treat you. And that's roughly a grain of salt. Now, if you have 2 grains of salt, you're not going to do very well.
After a recent drug bust in Flint, police are warning of a new, potentially deadly heroin mixture hitting the local streets.
But perhaps even more lethal. It's called fentanyl.
The cause of death here says that he self-administered fentanyl. And if you don't know what fentanyl is, it is basically the new heroin, but much, much stronger.
Here's the important part. If it was an accidental overdose...
So now people are dying of fentanyl overdoses in the heroin, and in some cases, fentanyl is being supplied pure without heroin. It's totally unregulated. It's not quality assured by the federal government. There's no drug company.
And it's because users who've used for years got a new drug with a new mix that they weren't accustomed to, and that's the reaction you have. So the problem with it is that you don't know what you're taking or what amount of the medication is mixed in that. It could be a lethal overdose the first time you take it, and we have actually seen that.
Fentanyl is just another new piece to this ever-evolving puzzle, and the community continues to struggle to retain its positive outlook. But solutions don't happen overnight, and attitude is the first defense.
We had to change what we're doing. We got here because it was 15 years of out-of-control opiates going up.
Do I see an end in sight? There has to be a lot of work. Our state is last on the Green Cross Safety Council report because we're not offering enough treatment.
In order to do the best job tying it together, unfortunately, one of the things that you need is money. And that's where the state can come in with resources, but the state has had its challenges recently.
I mean, I know they have to have these discussions publicly and everything, but to me I don't know what really can be done to stop the tide of this.
You do have to go through some kind of withdrawal to get off this stuff. And people have been told that they shouldn't ever have pain. That's a lie.
I'm still looking for a parent support group in this area. There isn't anything. I don't believe there's anything in Bay City. Now, maybe I'm just not looking hard enough. I don't know where to even begin to look.
It's one of those things where it's just like, you know, it's such a dark secret. You don't want to tell anybody about it because you're afraid of how they're going to react about it. Because, I mean, I've heard it all, really. I mean, and some of the things, it's like, you know, I hope you get raped or you get, you know, all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, like, do you even have any clue what I've been through already in my life? And it's kind of like, you know, people just casually throw that around. And it's like, that wears down on a person, too. I relapsed after that, too.
Too many people aren't taking it seriously, I think. It's being pushed off. A lot of people don't want to talk about it or admit it. And it's kind of frustrating. Somewhere down the line, everybody is involved in it somehow, whether they know it or not. But I think more people need to realize that there's a problem and try to help it.
As addicts, our silence is kind of murder because there's addicts dying every day because of the stigma that addiction holds. It's just crazy how people's fear will control them.
In some traditions, stigmatics are individuals attuned to suffering. St. Francis was said to have borne literal stigma, painful sores like puncture wounds on his arms and legs. Reminders of Christ's torment and how our ignorance and sin had caused it. Pain can be good when it tells us something. The spike in opiate death rates is painful to watch, but its message is plain. We did this. We let pharmaceutical companies push opiates for years without question. We locked up sufferers of substance use disorder. We pushed the job of solving a crisis we barely understood to law enforcement, educators, and medical professionals without really equipping them to do so. This is our opioid crisis. We cannot ask its victims to solve it for themselves because we are all its victims. And we will all be its conquerors. Someday soon, no one will have to suffer alone. Stigmatic.
I just did my makeup. Thank God for waterproof mascara. Thank God for that, guys.
Today I'm a recovery coach. I work at Victory Clinical Services and I get to help people that have been in my position, and I love it.
We all joined this group to be able to help people. And when you get people that come up to you and they have a problem and basically there's nothing you can do for them, that's hard to deal with.
There is no end in sight until people stop the stigma, and I feel really alone right now. Not a lot of doctors doing this.
This is all of her medical records, all the bills, all the correspondence, all the referrals. She racked up quite a bit of debt between co-pays and our insurance.
My son's death, just as one death, has impacted hundreds, I'm talking hundreds of people's lives for the positive. I have people reaching me like nonstop. Like, it's just amazing to see the beautiful things that are happening because of his death.
So now what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to find, instead of finding reasons to use, I'm trying to find a reason not to use at this point. That's my goal. So that's what I'm gonna do with that. Let's see. What else would you like to know?